Welcome everyone. So, as we were discussing in the previous lectures, we discussed about bakery products and technology. We discussed about type of flour, different types of wheat, and all of these things. So, in today's lecture, we will discuss about malting. Actually, malting has different. It has different purposes. Whenever we prepare the malt, then we can use it in different products. It has a lot of applications. One of them is the use in the production of beverages. So today we are going to discuss about malting, its purpose, its steps, what are the basic steps in this process. We will discuss, we will cover the uses of malt in this lecture. Otherwise we will cover this in next lecture. So what is malting? As it's mentioned here, that malt is germinated cereal grain that has been dried in a process known as malting. So this is actually the germinated cereal grain. This cereal can be it can be anywhere. It can be any cereal like barley. It can be wheat. So the grains, first of all, what we do in this process, first of all, the grains are made to germinate. First of all, we soak the grains in water, and then when we soak the grains in water, then their germination start. In the presence of water, their germination start, their enzymes become activated, and when the enzymes become activated, the processes that are happening also accelerate. They also the rate increases, and then we stop this process when the required germination is achieved. Then we stop the germination process, either by applying the heat, by applying the hot air. So then we get the malt. We can, as I told you earlier, that we can use different types of cereals that can be malted. Like barley is the most common one. So during malting, large molecular weight components of the endosperm cell walls, the storage proteins, and the starch granules are hydrolyzed by enzymes, rendering them more soluble in water. To provide that grains are ripe, free from fungal infestation, and intact should be intact. The yield of malt extract should be directly related to the starch content. So during malting, the large molecular weight components of the cell wall and the storage proteins, starch, and all of these components, they get hydrolyzed by the enzymes. So I told you earlier that when we soak the grains in water, then the germination process starts and the enzymes become more activated. So that's why when enzymes become more activated, the storage proteins and the starch and all of the components, then they become hydrolyzed. They become more soluble in water. So the purpose of malting. Actually, the purpose of malting malted barley is a source of sugars which are fermented into beer. As I told you earlier, that when we do the malting, we get when we get malt, then we can use it in different products. Like we can use it in different beverage products, and one of them is beer. We can make it. So the malting process allows the grain to partially germinate, making the seeds resources available to the brewer. Barley malt is the most commonly used source of fermentable sugars in beer. So actually, if I tell you the production process of beer, first of all we do the malting of the grains, and when we get the malt, first of all we prepare the malt, and after the production of malt, we do its fermentation. So first of all, the malting is the basic step. It's the first step after we do the fermentation process, because when we do the malting, when we are doing the preparation of beer, what's the basic requirement? We want to get some sugars, available sugars, fermentable sugars. So from where we get them? If we are producing beer, then in case of barley we have to convert maltose, we have to convert starch into maltose, so we have to get some fermentable sugars. So that's why we do the malting process, and enzymes increase the germination process and convert starch into maltose. They get hydrolyzed starch and many other components, they get hydrolyzed and then provide us the small molecular substances, and one of them is maltose. That's basic requirement for the production of beer. That's a basic fermentable sugar for the production of beer. So other grains that we can use in brewing, they include wheat, rye, oats, and sorghum. We can use also these grains. The characteristics that are required for malting barley are these are here. We require high germination capacity and energy with adequate enzyme activity. Capacity of grains modified by malting to produce a maximum of extract when mashed prior to fermentation. So before, in the production of beer or in the production of alcoholic beverages, all of these beverages, then what we do? First of all, we do the malting process, then we do mashing. We combine, we mix different ingredients like malt, cereal adjuncts, and all of these things. We mix up all of these things, then we go to the fermentation process. So capacity of grains that are modified by malting to produce maximum of extract, this should be the basic requirement. So low content of husk, high starch, and low protein contents. Starch content should be high, because if the starch content is high, then what we will get more, this is maltose, and this is fermentable sugar that's going to be beneficial for the production of beer. Actually, I'm not focusing on just beer. I'm just using this as an example, just to make you clear about malting process. So if high nitrogen barley is unsuitable for making, a high nitrogen barley is unsuitable because starch content is lower. Starch content is also lower, and the greater quantities of soluble proteins lead to haze formation and may provide nutrients for bacteria and impair the keeping quality of the beer. The greater quantities of soluble proteins actually lead to the haze condition. Haze is just a cloudiness, and when the temperature decreases, then a haze situation, cloudiness is created in the product, and that negatively affect the quality of the product, especially beverages. So longer malting times are required if nitrogen amount is greater. Modification never proceeds as far as in low nitrogen barleys, so that's why high nitrogen barley is not suitable for malting. This is the malting whole process, but we are going to discuss in the steps one by one next. So malting operations. The malting process is regulated by the initial choice of barley, the duration of growth, temperature, the grain moisture content, changes in the steeping schedule, and by use of additives. So here are the basic steps. Steeping is at the first. What is the steeping? Actually, when we soak in water, you can say that the soaking in water is called steeping. Then we allow the germination process, then we stop the germination when the required germination is achieved by kilning process. So steeping, cooking, soaking in water to extract the flavor of compounds, as I mentioned here. I guess you can see here, I have written here in the red color. So selected barley is steeped usually by immersion in water for a period choose to achieve a particular moisture level. First of all, we have to first of all, its purpose is to achieve particular moisture level. The water is drained from the grain which germinates. Then germination process is started. Conditions are regulated to keep the grain cool and to minimize water losses. So that's why the temperature that is kept below 18 degrees centigrade. So next step is germination. The grain germinates, then when the germination process starts, temperature and humidity are controlled. They need to be regulated very effectively. So temperature and humidity, they are controlled by humidifying and refrigerating, and or warming the air passing through it. And these are the basic conditions that are mentioned here, like the barley that the barley that is basically required, the amount of barley that is required, and the temperature 15 to 19 degrees centigrade that is basically required. So at intervals, the grain is mixed and tend to provide more uniform growth opportunities and to prevent the roots from mating together. So the grain is mixed. Why we mix the grain? When the germination process is started, then we do the mixing process, so that equally, so that all the grains can germinate evenly, uniformly, and to prevent the roots from matting together. As the embryo grows, it produces hormones, including this one, that stimulates the production of hydrolytic enzymes, leading to modification of the starchy endosperm. So the third step is kilning. Actually, this is the heating step. You can say that we provide the temperature to inactivate the enzymes to stop the germination process. So when modification is sufficient, it is stopped by kilning the green malt, that is by either by drying or cooking it in a current of hot dry air. The objective of kilning is to arrest botanical growth and internal modifications, to reduce moisture for grain storage, and to develop color and flavor components in the malt. So kilning this, we talked about the three steps during the malting, like stripping, for germination. Then now we are discussing about the kilning process. So the kilning is responsible for 90% of the energy, 90% of the energy consumption of the entire malting process. Until a heat recovery is in use, when the proportion may be reduced to 75 to 80%. Otherwise, the energy consumption 90% energy is used in kilning process. A recent innovation in kiln design is the double deck version. In this system, this is another innovation. In this system, green malt is loaded on the upper deck and transferred to the lower deck after partial drying. So the green malt moves from top to the bottom, and the drying agent, the drying medium, that is air, hot air, warmed air, that moves from lower to the upper portion. So warmed air is passed first to the dry lower bed before passing unsaturated to the upper level, to the upper bed, where it is capable of removing moisture from the green malt. So green malt moves from upper deck to the lower deck, but the hot air, the warm air, moves from lower portion to the upper portion. So it removes the moisture from green malt. Dry malt is stable on storage, and unlike barley, it is readily crushed. So we can crush it readily. Malt contains relatively large amounts of soluble sugars and nitrogenous substances, and if it has been killed at low temperature, it contains high levels of hydrolytic enzymes. So here, the if a question arises in the mind of viewer, that what's we can use malt, and what's the basic purpose, we can use barley, then what's the basic purpose of converting this barley into malt? are grains, what's the basic purpose of converting grains into malt? So its answer lies here, that the malt contains large quantities of soluble sugars, nitrogenous substances, and all of these things. And besides that, we discussed this earlier, that it converts starch into some processes. Requirement is small molecular substances like maltose. That's the basic requirement for the beer production. So that's why it becomes a necessity to convert starch, large molecular substances, into smaller molecular substances like maltose, like starch, into maltose. So when we convert barley into malt, then we get the maltose. And after doing this, the fermentation process starts, maltose fermentation starts, then we get the required product. So here are the uses of malt. Okay, so we covered this in this lecture. What are the uses of malt? So here are the uses of malt. When crushed malt is mixed with warm water, then the enzymes, when we get the malt and after that crush it with the warm water, then enzymes catalyze the hydrolysis of starch, either polysaccharides, proteins, and nucleic acids, and they become accessible to us, so whether from the malt or from the materials mixed with it. So this is the first use. And malt also gives color, aroma, and flavor to the product, and it forms the feedstock for fermentation, for brewing, or distillation. As I discussed earlier with you guys, that it forms a feedstock for fermentation, like for brewing or distillation. So what are the byproducts of malting and where we can use them? So the main byproducts of malting is called malt sprouts. We separate them from the kilned malt by passing the malt through revolving reels on a white screen. So they count about 3 to 5% of the product, and they are incorporated into the stock feeds. So what are the non-brewing uses of malt? Milled barley malt is usually used as a high dietary supplement for bread flours and as a flavor supplement in malt loaves. Malt, we can also use malt in the manufacture of malt vinegar. So these are the uses of the malt. So we discussed about malting. So here then we discuss about the purpose of malting and malting operations. Here is the flow chart. You can say that here is a pictorial representation of the malting process. The first one is the steeping, then germination, then killing. At the steeping process, enhance the moisture content is 12%. Then the during germination process, after doing the steeping, we enhance the moisture content to 45%. And then we do the cleaning process. We pass the hot air from the green malt, then the moisture content is reduced from about 45% to 44%. So that's the basic purpose of kilning. So these are the malting operations. The first one is steeping, then germination, then we discuss about the kilning. The major innovation in kiln design is double deck version. Then we discuss about the uses of malt. So in the next lecture, what we are going to discuss, it's a secret. Okay, so Allah Hafiz, till then, see you in the next lecture.